Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Tess Eidem, and today I spoke at the Marijuana Enforcement Division of Colorado's Permanent Rulemaking Hearing. It's October 1st, 2024, and I'm just going to make a recording of that. We were given 2 minutes. My recording is probably closer to 15, so I had to summarize this today, so I just wanted to give the full reading of my statement on recent regulation changes. So I'm just going to read it as if I was there. So, good morning everyone, and thank you for allowing me to speak at the final rulemaking hearing. My name is Dr. Tess Eidem, and I'm a senior research scientist at the University of Colorado Boulder in the Environmental Engineering Department. I'm a microbiologist, and my research investigates airborne molds, microbial toxins, and aeroallergens in the aerobiology and disinfection laboratory. Before my time at CU Boulder, I worked in the cannabis space for nearly 4 years, first as an employee directly working in cannabis production, and then as a consultant helping cannabis growers overcome microbial contamination in their facilities. I've spent thousands of hours in over 20 cannabis cultivation and manufacturing facilities and have seen similar reoccurring health and safety issues in these spaces. The bottom line is the cannabis industry has major issues with poor sanitation practices and poor indoor air quality. There are also increasing anecdotal stories in peer-reviewed literature demonstrating that the environmental conditions in cannabis operations are linked to contaminated flower products that have high levels of total yeast and mold. These workplace conditions are also linked to respiratory issues in cannabis workers who cite mold exposure in these environments as contributing to their development of occupational asthma or exacerbation of existing asthma symptoms. 2 peer-reviewed publications out of Colorado found that airborne mold spore levels were high in cannabis operations, comparable to water-damaged homes and flood remediation sites, and respiratory protection was recommended by the authors. Our group at CU Boulder, in collaboration with Colorado State University, recently published on worker exposure risks to bioaerosols in the cannabis industry and highlighted major research gaps that must be addressed to protect workers. Today I want to specifically address cannabis remediation. Its unregulated and unlabeled use is enabling these unsanitary cannabis cultivation and manufacturing environments to continue to operate without addressing the root cause of their microbial contamination. I strongly urge the state of Colorado to rewrite rules within SB24-076 Streamline Marijuana Regulation that allow cannabis flower remediation and prohibit the state from labeling these products as remediated. These practices are putting cannabis workers, patients, and consumers at risk. So today I will focus on 4 major areas of concern and reform. Number 1, remediation is prohibited by the United States Pharmacopoeia, and Colorado should also prohibit remediation. Number 2, labeling of treated product must be required. However, it should only be used responsibly on compliant, high-quality product as an extra measure of safety, especially for at-risk populations. Number 3, current regulatory loopholes must be closed before an accurate assessment of remediation can be performed, as these loopholes right now are allowing cannabis cultivators to sidestep transparent documentation of remediation treatments. And finally, number 4, remediation methods must be approved by the state only after undergoing safety and efficacy validation assessments. This ensures that these technologies are applied uniformly and that it really confirms that decontamination treatment does not adulterate or leave any residual harmful reaction byproducts on those flower products that have been treated. So backing up to point number 1, remediation is prohibited by USP. The process of remediation is not the same as a cook step for food or a wash step for produce. Food must be produced under sanitary conditions, stored properly, and it cannot be adulterated or spoiled. In contrast, cannabis flower remediation, which is allowed here in Colorado, is frequently used when flower products are spoiled infected, handled improperly, and or stored inappropriately. While food products would be disposed of under these conditions, Colorado allows microbially contaminated cannabis flower to be treated with decontamination methods, such as ionizing radiation or irradiation and ozone. And this allows manufacturers to recover that product that failed microbial testing. This practice of abusing decontamination treatments to recover microbially contaminated cannabis flower is called remediation, and there really is no parallel process in food. Remediation is specifically prohibited by the USP recommendations for cannabis flower, which state, quote, treatment methods such as irradiation should not be used as a means to remediate cannabis contaminated above the allowed limits, end quote. So in summary of point 1, remediation should not be allowed to treat failed cannabis flower. Instead, the root causes of microbial contamination should be addressed, and prevention-based quality assurance and quality control programs must be implemented, as in parallel consumed goods. Point number 2, decontaminated cannabis flower must be labeled. There may be instances where decontamination methods can be used responsibly on compliant, high-quality cannabis flower products. For example, as an extra measure to protect immunocompromised patients. However, in food and medicinal herbal products, decontamination methods must be listed on the product label according to the World Health Organization and the Food and Drug Administration. WHO's guidelines for medicinal plants states that, quote, antimicrobial treatments of medicinal plant materials, raw or processed by various methods, including irradiation, must be declared and the materials must be labeled as required, end quote. The FDA states that, quote, irradiated food be adequately labeled, and under the general labeling requirements, it is necessary that the food processor inform the consumer that food has been irradiated, end quote. So in summary of point number 2, if these decontamination methods are used properly on compliant high-quality flour, not to recover failed product or product likely to fail before it's sent out for third-party testing, it must be labeled. Point number 3, remediation loopholes and violations in Colorado regulations continue to be exploited. So current Colorado regulations contain loopholes that are exploited to violate testing and remediation documentation. According to 1 CCR 212-3-3-320, quote, the microbial decontamination method must be accurately documented in the inventory tracking system for packages that have been decontaminated, end quote. Remediation disclosure within the inventory tracking system, which here in Colorado is metric, is required, but it is possible to avoid reporting the failed microbial test and to avoid reporting the remediation treatment altogether in metric. So it gives us basically zero idea of what's going on. And there's a couple of ways that cultivators can exploit these loopholes. One is by calling remediation a, quote, microbial control step, end quote, which remediates likely to fail cannabis flower before it is sent out for testing. So cultivators know when they're failing, they understand, they see moldy product, they know they didn't get their dry cure down to the right temperature, they saw infected plants. So instead of sending it out for third-party testing because they know it's going to fail, they will do this microbial control step, which is basically proactive remediation. So using this approach, the failed test results and the remediation treatment are never entered into metric. Another exploitation is for cultivators to submit an R&D sample from the final product lot, which will not be associated with the final product in metric. If the R&D sample fails for microbial contamination, the manufacturer can remediate that product with no metric documentation of its microbial failure or decontamination method used. There are other loopholes that are allowing cannabis manufacturers to get around, proper documentation of these decontamination/remediation treatments. They can hire cannabis remediation companies to come to their facility and remediate their flower as a service, which again will have no record of that remediation treatment in metric unless the product has previously failed third-party testing. They may also transfer cannabis flower to another facility to remediate it off-site before sending out for third-party testing. Again, especially if they know their flower is going to fail, they'll send it out to a decontamination site. Now this is actually a violation, it's kind of a shadow violation of 1 CCR 212-3-3-320, which states, quote, "A regulated marijuana business shall not accept or transfer to any person or any regulated marijuana that has failed required testing," end quote. So you are not supposed to transfer failed product back and forth. But as I mentioned before, microbially failed cannabis flower may not be properly documented in metric, so they'll send it out before they test. Therefore, these contaminated cannabis flower products that would normally fail testing are being transferred for remediation. So that really does violate our own Colorado rules around this. So you can treat it off-site, transfer it back to the manufacturer, and avoid any remediation documentation in metric. So in summary, my point number 3 really comes down to that Colorado cannabis rules are being violated, and loopholes are basically preventing an accurate understanding of what products are failing and or being remediated. So before we can even talk about proper labeling of decontaminated flower, these loopholes must be closed. And finally, point number 4 is that remediation methods have not undergone safety and efficacy validation. Unlike decontamination methods used in food, cannabis remediation methods have not been validated for efficacy or safety. Important parameters like exposure time, concentration of the chemical that you're using to treat with, or dose of irradiation have not been established or published. Indeed, some remediation device manufacturers specifically withhold this important information from their users. For example, some ozone remediation device manufacturers do not disclose the ozone concentration used in their machines, calling this information proprietary. These important treatment parameters are required in parallel food manufacturing. These are called your critical points. So you have these different critical control points, and your critical limits are your temperature, your time, your concentration. So for example, when you're cooking chicken, the internal temperature should reach 165 degrees Fahrenheit to be fully cooked. That's established by the FDA. Suffice to say, the FDA would not accept cooking chicken to a proprietary temperature, and we should not accept that either in the cannabis space. We need a lot more information about these instruments, what they're doing, and how to use them. Importantly, some remediation treatments are known to create reaction products that could alter and or adulterate the product and may be harmful to consumers. So this actually violates another Colorado rule, Section 1 CCR 212-3-3-330, which states, quote, "A regulated marijuana cultivation facility may not treat or otherwise adulterate regulated marijuana with any chemical or any other compound whatsoever to alter its color, appearance, weight, or smell," end quote. As previously mentioned, ozone is approved in Colorado to remediate terpene-rich cannabis flower. However, ozone is well known to react with terpenes to create reaction byproducts like formaldehyde, which is a carcinogen. In fact, here in Colorado, researchers at NIST recently published an article showing that low levels of environmental ozone reacted with terpenes from evergreen trees to produce formaldehyde. The ozone levels that NIST used in that paper were several thousand times less than what is listed within patents for ozone remediation devices. So this suggests that formaldehyde generation could be significant and harmful within ozone devices, posing risks to workers in those environments and risk to consumers if harmful reaction products remain on the remediated flower. So in summary, for point number 4, robust safety and validation assessments must be performed on cannabis remediation/decontamination treatments before they can be used effectively without adulterating cannabis flower or making it unsafe. So in conclusion, these issues that I mentioned here were echoed by the National Academies of Science, which just reported last week this report called Cannabis Policy Impacts Public Health and Health Equity. This report highlights areas where state and federal leadership has failed to establish and enforce quality standards to safeguard public health. I urge Colorado legislators, the Med, and CDPHE officials to rewrite SB24-076 or introduce new legislation that prohibits the abuse of remediation to recover failed product, close the loopholes that allow decontaminated or undocumented cannabis remediation, and require labeling for decontamination treatments applied to cannabis flower. Failure to act will perpetuate a cycle of environmental contamination, worker exposure, and the potential for contaminated products to reach consumers and patients. It is time for Colorado to stand up as a leader in the cannabis industry and prioritize these reforms to ensure a safe and sustainable cannabis market.